So we'll focus a bit more on recruitment, and I do know, and I've kept this section light, understanding that, you know, the path to recruitment for your volunteers is pretty straight, right? It's, you know, there has to be someone from each team that fulfills the safety person role. So it's not as though you're necessarily having to go to the community at large to find people to fill these roles. So again, just giving you some of the best practices around recruitment. So providing a clear, updated role description for volunteers. You want to be clear about what the expectations are, but also what the supports are for that role. Know what you want. What are the skills and experience before attempting to recruit? And really being clear, because as I understand it with this position, you know, some people might assume that they need to have a strong medical background, and that's not necessarily the case, right? So being really clear what you need and what you don't need, so that people don't self-select out, making an assumption on a skill set that they don't actually need to do the role, because there's training provided, right? So when you're talking to people about the role, making it clear so that they're not, you know, gonna just select out because they think they need something else. What we found to be one of the most successful approaches was that targeted approach, that direct approach, and by that I mean the people you know. So going to people you know, connecting with people that they know, leveraging your networks to try and get people who are interested. Or, you know, if I put my HR hat on, they're sort of like those change champions of the role, people who are going to talk really positively about it, so that people are like, yeah, you know what, I am going to take that on, right? So you're kind of getting that network, that group of people who's out there. In our case, those were those leadership volunteers. While we did post for them, in many cases it was a tap on the shoulder or asking someone, hey, like, do you know someone that would be really good for this? Friends and family recommendations, they're also more likely to stay. It's a lot harder for someone to step away and have that conversation with you if you have an existing relationship. So it is a really good, I'm not saying you want to pressure people into it, but at the same time, sometimes you need to do that, right? And recruitment is a balance between meeting the needs of the organization and the needs of the volunteer. I do think you need to be flexible, but you need to know what you can be flexible on. So the example that I would give you, you know, with the Canada Games, we asked for a minimum requirement of 32 hours over that 2-week time frame. And we said, you know, we aren't going to schedule people together. It's just really, really difficult when you're dealing in the thousands of people. Well, on a case-by-case basis, if someone came to us at the volunteer center and said, well, you know, here's my situation, you know, we're driving an hour and a half to get here, could, you know, us as spouses be scheduled together? Well, that was something we could be flexible on, and we were able to do that. But there were other things that we just could not compromise on, whether it's safety, whether it's, you know, just meeting the minimum requirements of that role. We couldn't change a shift time. The game starts at this time, you can't be here an hour and a half later, it defeats the purpose. So it's being flexible on what you can be flexible on and just being open to that conversation. But it is a balance. So sometimes, you know, you might have to say no because the interests of the organization and the requirement just supersede that. And so the other recommendation that I do have is consider the recruitment of a 2IC. So if you're not familiar with what that is, it's like a second in command. So you might have one person from the team, but encouraging teams to have a second person just on any committee, anything like, not even just this specific position. 2ICs are a good idea for succession and continuity. You can decide that someone's going to take the lead one year and the other person's kind of observing and in the wings and kind of the backup. And then the next year, they're going to take that lead role, and you might recruit a different 2IC who's going to be that backup and in that learning mode. So you're constantly got somebody in the wings, and you're not having to every year do the training over and over again. The other thing is that if you do find, if the volunteer finds themselves in a situation where it's a really tough one and they want their second person to do the assessment or, work with them on something, you've got 2 opinions versus just one, which might be a little bit, more challenging. So having 2 people can be very beneficial, but also for that succession standpoint, so your year-over-year success in having somebody in that role. So we did endeavor to have 2 ICs for really as many positions as leadership positions as we could, so that they're in that, crossover. And if someone can't come, the other person is there. There's lots of benefits to it. So again, given the nature of the role, it'll likely be filled by people already affiliated with the team, but I did want to highlight if, there was a need or desire to recruit from the general public, that there's lots of different ways of accomplishing this. There are volunteer websites. Volunteer Central is the one for Central Alberta, and they will post advertisements. They actually have anyone who indicated that they were willing to have their name shared with Volunteer Central once the games were done, and that was to the tune of over 4,000 people, said that they were comfortable with that. They have that whole database, so they're able to access volunteers. So that's a good source. There's community bulletin boards, depending on your size of community, reaching out to related businesses. So again, if you do want someone with more of a medical background, go to some of those organizations. And like I said, friends and family. It really is the top method for recruiting. And we did track, how did you hear about us? And it was, without a doubt, the highest friends and family or coworkers, right? So the people you know.